Welcome to Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. I'm Ron Scholl. Last time on Gas, as Lucinda Hodges and others tried to live in a town that made them sick, she reconstituted ACE into ACCEH, the Alberton Community Coalition for Environmental Health, and began a letter-writing campaign to government agencies to seek help. We now continue with Part 3, Chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2, Sleuths. Hodges and Griffin craved information. As a result of the November conference call, they received the draft EPA Superfund Technical Assessment and Response Team report, or START, on the Alberton incident. The START report added a new layer of suspicion when the women read that the feds were, quote, denied access to the hot zone until April 14, and that federal assistance was not requested by the state of Montana and MRL in the hot zone. The women were stunned. Who denied the feds? They immediately assumed MRL had been hiding something. And then we got the idea that we had to start looking at the documents and the files, Hodges recalled. Through 1996, very little was available in the public record at the Missoula County Courthouse. More and more trickled in that winter. Once we started looking at the documents, we became obsessed, Hodges said. As horrible as our lives were, if we hadn't have done that, I don't think we would have survived. We needed more than each other. We needed answers. And once we started getting into the documents, we were insatiable because we were starting to get answers. And that just lit a fire under us. Most every Friday from January into March, they visited the Mineral and Missoula County courthouses to scour the incident files and make copies. Hodges had a small-town adventure when she tried to review EPA documents she requested from Chris Weiss. He sent them to the public file at the town hall across from her house. The Alberton city clerk locked herself in the office when Hodges first asked, then demanded, to see the files. She felt she was protecting the town of Alberton by not letting me see the files, she said. The clerk feared the information would be used in some lawsuit. They had been friends, another relationship dissolved by bad chemistry. Documents kept arriving at the courthouse as bureaucracy caught up to the event. By their count, the women gathered some 6,500 pages altogether. The Missoula courthouse called their file the box, courtesy of Incident Command. Thousands of pages without an index, nothing bound or organized, no file dividers. The public was left to make sense of the mess. Does this really satisfy the point of EPCRA and RTK, Hodges wondered, referring to the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. They worked out a system where after their excursions, Griffin, who now suffered insomnia, would stay up all night reading, highlighting, and organizing files into binders. We didn't have jobs, Hodges said. This is what we did with our time between raising kids and our own illness. Painstakingly, Hodges pieced together information about the quantities of chemical compounds found by the testing of the potassium cresslate. It isn't like there was a file marked potassium cresslate car testing up at the courthouse, she said. It was really hard to find this. Among the compounds in tank sample SOL66 were 9 that Garrett Smith had found, consisting of phenol, methylphenols, and chlorinated phenols. But the numbers startled Hodges. 4 types of phenols ranged in concentrations from 8,150 parts per million to 23,600 parts per million, and 5 chlorinated phenols ranged in concentrations from 35 parts per million to 183 parts per million, the largest being 2,4,6-trichlorophenol. An EPA sludge sample from the ditch revealed similarly high levels. These 2 samples showed that the cresslate and cresslate-drenched soil had been rich in phenols and chlorinated phenols, chemicals that smelled like pesticides. Hodges said, the stuff in the potassium cresslate, the phenols, that just blew us away to see the levels that we were talking about in those records. Only small levels of chemicals from soil samples had been previously publicized. Hodges put the files on SOL66 in a purple folder, her hot file of what she felt to be evidence that she was exposed to more than chlorine. ACCEH also finally obtained a copy of the Olympus 2-volume report, released the last day of 1996. Olympus documented that high concentrations of phenols and chlorinated phenols had been found in stained soil in the ditch. It was the tank car testing and then seeing this soil testing That's when we were like, God damn it, they have lied to us big time, Hodges said. I think I had a right to know these figures before I went home. The EPA had known that cresslate and stain soil were extremely toxic. They just weren't concerned because they determined nothing had traveled beyond the immediate site. Hodges and Griffin didn't believe that because of what they continued to smell and some of their symptoms. Regardless, information was withheld from the public for no apparent reason. Residents and media hadn't even been told how much cresslate had spilled. These documents only generated more suspicion over who had known what and when, and why it wasn't revealed. ACCEH also scanned the files for evidence of air monitoring for SVOCs, semi-volatile organic compounds, like phenols and the chlorinated phenols that smelled of pesticides. The START report said nothing, and Olympus's scant summary only noted that field screening for organic vapors detected nothing. And despite letters to the EPA beginning in 1996, by early 2000, Hodges was still trying to get a copy of Marine Environmental's air monitoring report. ACCEH wrote, when Marine Environmental was contacted by phone, they said their final report had been turned in to MRL in June of 1996. When plaintiffs in litigation asked for documents related to contracted air monitoring, MRL objected, saying they were protected from discovery by attorney work product privilege, as they did with the bronzed vegetation map. And yet, this information might have been crucial to the immediate health concerns of the victims and important to understanding their later chronic problems. MRL had generated the public threat and then controlled information about it. Information that the EPA and health officials should have controlled. What was MRL hiding, Hodges wondered. From Hodges and Griffin's point of view, residents endured a 17-day evacuation during which they witnessed obvious attempts by officials to limit open discussion at public meetings, and had been told little about any chemicals other than chlorine until residents reported a pesticide-like smell, which triggered an investigation, and witnessed a white powder which no official seemed capable of finding. After re-entry, they were told all was safe, but they continued to smell odors that triggered often debilitating symptoms upon visiting or attempting to reoccupy Alberton. And they were told any remaining symptoms should soon fade, yet they lingered or got worse. Now their discovery of unpublicized information almost a year after the spill, including the initial denial of the EPA to visit the site and the concentrations of chemicals in the samples, inflamed their suspicion of a cover-up. They were convinced they had been lied to, even if they didn't understand why. It took us a year to gather most of the material and make sense of it, Hodges said, of the burgeoning files. She and Griffin wondered if there could be more state files. Time for a road trip. In early March of 1997, Hodges drove Griffin in her broken-down tracer to Helena, braving the black ice of Rogers Pass. At DEQ, the women introduced themselves to Administrative Director Tom Ellerhoff, who acted as if he didn't know Hodges. I bet I'd called him 30 to 40 times before I went there. I think his records reflect 1 or 2 phone calls from me. I called so much it was pathetic, Hodges said. We told him we wanted to see the files, and I felt he was nervous about that. The women worked through a thick stack of papers, DEQ's Alberton spill file, finding much information that DEQ had not given the courthouses, especially logs on phone calls and correspondence, which reflected citizen complaints. On the way home, Griffin perused the new stuff. One of the first items to catch her eye was the Plum Creek document that loggers had been made ill downwind of the site before soil removal. And Ellerhoff supported relocation in the best interest for all concerned, he wrote. This had never been publicized or put in the public record. Hodges later wrote that Ellerhoff told her that complaints from individuals who are not in the plume are taken more seriously by his office because those people would not be sensitized to the smell or chemicals and are therefore looked upon as more reliable. Ellerhoff didn't seem to grasp the health significance of sensitization, apparently focusing on heightened ability to detect smells while dismissing a lower threshold of triggered symptoms. The women were outraged. Those bastards! No one thought relocation was in the best interest of people living near the site, people already sensitized from the spill. While residents had complained fruitlessly of the smell and feeling sick, the damn state had supported a corporate complaint, and no one had heard a word. And then Griffin found the electric co-op meter reader files, also not included in the county file, that backed up rumors circulating the previous fall. Bastards! The women seethed, yet elated, feeling vindicated in their belief that something in the environment was still affecting people, despite DEQ's denials to residents. That day we left there feeling so happy, Hodges recalled. We were celebrating all the way home, just hootin' and hollerin', armed with proof of contamination and discrimination. Nuggets panned from the bureaucratic sludge of Last Chance Gulch. Roger Chalmers did his own sleuthing. A 10-year Air Force veteran, Chalmers was on 100% disability because of glaucoma and tunnel vision. He and fellow musician wife Ada had played together for 16 years and were ready to house their country western band in a permanent location in Florence, Montana. They were 2 days away from finalizing a small business loan when the spill happened. Their house was collateral, but after the spill, they couldn't get an appraisal and all plans fell through. Sick, their life in disarray, the Chalmers stopped playing music, and money was getting tight. Driven from a home that made them ill, after MRL stopped paying for their motel in June, they began a 25-month odyssey, mostly on the road, living in a travel trailer around western Montana. Roger devoted his exile to researching the spill. It tore through our lives and consumed us, Ada said. When we weren't laying down sick from chemical injury, we were working on that. That winter, Roger connected with Hodges from a distance. One of the most vocal critics of the official story, Chalmers' passion was investigation. His email moniker became Sleuth, and he eventually considered himself the technical advisor for ACCEH. Because of some of his allegations, Chalmers became a lightning rod, in more ways than one. Even his basic claim of exposure was questioned by many residents and officials because the Chalmers lived to the northeast, across the mountains to the 9-mile drainage, where no one was evacuated. Unbeknownst to them, a neighbor, Jerry Schweitzer, also claimed exposure. Like Hodges and Griffin, Roger Chalmers pored over the public records. Chalmers also wrote the White House for help, who relayed his concerns to the EPA. Chalmers had requested sampling at his property to determine migration of the gas cloud. In a nutshell, he believed test results proved that chlorine and chlorinated compounds had reached his house, the opposite conclusion of official reports. Motivated by anger and a desire for answers, Chalmers doggedly pursued all leads. But he exhibited a tendency to stubbornly fixate on a belief once he embraced it, despite evidence to the contrary. Misinterpretations aside, the Chalmers were convinced their home was contaminated because returning made them feel worse. Any testing was an attempt at scientific corroboration for the visceral belief. Chalmers dug into other aspects of the spill. I asked them for the bills of lading for the cars that were involved in the derailment, he said. A page of information for each train car. What he found convinced him of subterfuge. That winter, Chalmers' phone bills ran $400 to $600 a month as he called the CEOs of shippers and receivers, the EPA, FRA, DOT, NTSB, FDA, FBI, and MRL. Every letter in the alpha bureaucracy soup. Chalmers hadn't joined ACE, he said, because he was an outsider from 9 Mile, but he had noted Lucinda Hodges asking questions in meetings as she had of him. He heard that she finally got a copy of the train manifest, the one-line description, somewhat coded, for each train car. I gave her a copy of the bills of lading, she gave me a copy of the manifest, and we decided to put them together and see if we could make any sense of this. Chalmers spent countless hours with these documents, the Federal Code of Regulations, and his phone, trying to make sense of what was on the train, where it was going, which loads were compromised, and their ultimate fate. The 17th car behind Power was BN 561897, a car that Chalmers would fixate on and call the mystery car, a long, skinny, black gondola boxcar. As the cars derailed, BN 561897 came to rest in the ditch at an angle almost parallel with the Crestlake tank. The manifest and waybill for BN 561897 listed no product information except a E for empty and a weight of 33 tons, matching an empty car. MRL told the Chalmers and the EPA that the car was empty. Chalmers believed MRL tried to cover up information about BN 561897 because it was missing in the bills of lading, a mystery car. The railroad maintained that empty cars required no bill of lading, which Chalmers denied. According to Kenneth Holgard of the FRA, the only cars not requiring a bill of lading would be empty, non-hazardous. Car BN 561897, listed as a boxcar, was apparently the car that John Elmer Smith Jr. and Lucky rode in. In Chalmers' early correspondence, he stated his belief, for unclear reasons, that hydrochloric acid was shipped in car BN 561897. After Chalmers found an MSDS for caustic soda, sodium hydroxide, or NaOH, in the public files, MRL told him that caustic soda was brought to the site to neutralize the chlorine, which accounted for the MSDS. Chalmers soon believed BN 561897 hauled caustic soda and had spilled, though in his mind he continued to make a link with hydrochloric acid and this car as well. Chalmers confused chemicals, writing NaOH, which is another name for caustic soda, hydrochloric acid, he wrote. HCl and NaOH were two entirely different chemicals, the former an acid and the latter a base, though acids are sometimes called caustic because both acids and bases burn. Chalmers thought the car had spilled, reacting with rain to produce, quote, acid rain. Chalmers seemed to believe what he wanted to believe. In sum, Chalmers believed, like some others, that the Crestlake contributed to contamination far off-site and that a load of caustic soda reacted with rain to produce a cloud of hydrochloric acid. The latter belief was wholly his own, and he acutely focused on the alleged load of caustic soda in the mystery car, BN 561897, otherwise known as empty. Of course, the acid cloud from chlorine gas included hydrochloric acid anyway. Meanwhile, Chalmers continued to look at the whole train, coming to believe that some cars that didn't derail nevertheless had hazardous releases, specifically the tank of butane and the tank of hydrochloric acid in solution, also called muriatic acid. There was no evidence that these cars released their contents. Questionable conclusions aside, Roger Chalmers was earnest in his investigations. Truth and integrity mattered greatly to him, though his self-importance seemed inflated. He had wondered, what if he hadn't been in the path of the cloud that night? He decided it was meant to be. He was serving a purpose. Ceaseless in his pursuit of finding out why he and others were sick, Chalmers left no rock unturned. Right or wrong, or in some gray zone, Chalmers' interpretations mattered, because as he became a vocal member of ACCEH, he made claims that attracted some of the scant media attention, and he made repeated contacts with various government officials. Chalmers' credibility affected ACCEH's credibility. He also became a thorn in the hide of MRL. Attorney Randy Cox wrote Chalmers' lawyers on December 19, 1996. We've been advised that Mr. Chalmers has been contacting various MRL customers and seeking information with respect to products that were on the MRL train, Cox wrote. He has made various misstatements and misrepresentations, including passing himself off as an MRL employee and claiming that certain food products from the train were used in ways they were not. Chalmers had called MRL for information on a holiday, identifying himself as Roger, and an obliging staffer apparently assumed he was an employee with the same first name, to Chalmers' glee. In addition, Cox wrote, he has continually contacted MRL seeking information that we will simply not agree to give him. For better or worse, Chalmers made an impression. He wrote the White House in the spring of 1997 that he had received a foreclosure notice on his house. I cannot afford to live in a motel and pay for my home at the same time, he said. Our home and all of our possessions are toxic because of Montana Rail Link's accident and they're not being honest about what happened. In June of 1997, Jack McGraw of Region 8 EPA replied to Chalmers' letters to President Bill Clinton. The EPA denied that unreported chemicals had spilled, reiterated that compounds related to the cressolate did not migrate off-site, that BN 561897 was empty, and that there is no information to suggest that an ongoing health threat exists from the spill area. Chalmers had also made criminal allegations, and after he sent his 1997 letters to President Clinton, these claims were referred by the Washington, D.C. office of the EPA to the Criminal Investigation Division. The EPA noted that Special Agent in Charge Fred Burnside would contact Chalmers when the investigation into his criminal allegations was completed. While Chalmers' interpretation of the testing and chemicals appeared fuzzy, something had made him and Ada chronically ill, and something in their home was intolerable when they visited. Frustration and misery fueled their efforts. All I ever wanted to do was play guitar in a band, Chalmers said years later. The winter of 1997, ACCEH geared up a second campaign of letter writing. Hodges and Griffin hammered health issues with ATSDR. Assistant Surgeon General Dr. Barry Johnson had written that ATSDR was unable to provide medical care by statute. The women cited the Superfund Act, CERCLA, back at Johnson. Under the law, they wrote, CERCLA, Section 104I1D, and we quote, in cases of public health emergencies caused or believed to be caused by exposure to toxic substances, provide medical care and testing to exposed individuals, or any other assistance appropriate under the circumstances. ACCEH reiterated that they also wanted clinical evaluations and referrals to specialists in environmental medicine, and they still wanted the health survey results. As far as a mandate to provide health care, Johnson wrote back, there was no declaration of a public health emergency at that time invoking ATSDR authority, and based on our evaluation of the data available for review, there is currently no justification for such a declaration. No federal emergency. Hodges already knew that ATSDR had never provided medical care. The original mandate had quickly become politically inexpedient. Johnson held out a small and vague carrot, saying ATSDR might do some clinical evaluations by doctors specialized in environmental medicine. He suggested a community meeting that spring as part of developing community-based health education. Hopefully, the health survey would be ready by then to discuss, he wrote. For nearly a year after the spill, officials merely confirmed earlier conclusions that the area and site were safe. If some people still had health complaints, they needed to work with their doctors and lawyers and MRL. Hodges and Griffin knew differently. Something was there. How else to account for why they felt so much worse at home? While the smell subsided that winter, Hodges still had worse symptoms when staying in Alberton, and she continued to dodge the spill, spending as much time as she could in the cramped Missoula trailer with her family. The women's document hunt ended just at the start of spring thaw in 1997, when that horrible something awoke. Chapter 3, Meltdown. Epigraph. I was dying there. Lucinda Hodges. I always say I never had a successful return home, Hodges said. It's not like I ever stayed because I just couldn't. I was so sick. Strange new symptoms came on progressively after Hodges' on and off return in August, including breathing problems that put her on an inhaler. I changed, like I blew up with water weight. She was on prednisone. That's when I started losing my sensation in my hands. I had heard other people having this problem. I was dropping plates, and I realized I was losing the sensation in my hands. Sometimes it would be all the way up my arms. They would go numb, and then a feeling like rubber bands, something tightening around your muscles, my wrists. And very, very painful when the feeling would come back in my hands. I got leg braces because my joints hurt so bad. I would wrap the Velcro around the ankles, my knees. She hid her legs beneath long dresses or baggy pants. I didn't want anybody to know that I was having that much trouble. I just couldn't handle it. Some days I just couldn't honestly walk. It was hard to believe she was the same person who had backpacked the Appalachian and Continental Divide trails and worked on board a sailing ketch. She saw Dr. Frederick Mote in Superior after returning to Alberton, and Dr. Mary Stranahan of St. Ignatius. They both were trying to work with me, but nothing was helping, Hodges said. Dr. Mote wrote MRL a letter that said she's got to get out of her house, and they never acknowledged that letter. And Dr. Stranahan put the same thing in the medical records. The husband, Mark Hansen, was sick too. She thought it helped him to be out of the house during jobs. He was having to treat me like a child. It was disgusting. He worked that winter plowing snow in Alberton after the construction season. Hansen worked 18 to 20-hour days during the heaviest snowfalls and paid kids in Alberton to split wood or shovel snow and keep an eye on Lucinda. He just kept saying, "Oh, if you have a positive attitude, you'll get through this." He didn't recognize what was happening to me. He never knew how bad it was. I was dying there. I really feel that. Her children suffered as well in Alberton. Jesse was just so tired and fatigued, and he had a runny nose all the time, but he wasn't complaining like Trask. He wasn't having pain like Trask. I just thought that he was run down, but it was worse than that. School had been chaotic. Jesse was in second grade in Paul Lodge's class, and Hodges checked in at times. Jesse, Conrad Wasser, and some other kids in the class seemed constantly fatigued. Lodge, ill himself, would let them nap on the floor. He was definitely very aware of both the physical and mental stress on these kids, Hodges said, and was trying to help them through that, I think. The attitude differed with Trask's fourth grade teacher. Things were going very roughly, Hodges said. She wouldn't acknowledge at all. She was the opposite of Lodge, and she expected these kids to give 100% like normal. I felt like things were a mess, and the rumors were that teachers were getting sick, even the teachers who commuted from Missoula. They were getting headaches and having problems during the day, and I think that affected their ability to teach. But it was unspoken that you don't talk about it, you don't make a scene about it, and they wanted their jobs. Some teachers treated Lodge poorly, Hodges said. He had told us that if he said anything at the schools about how he's having memory problems, getting headaches, they would tease him. They wouldn't take it seriously, and he just learned not to say anything about the health problems he was having. The principal told Hodges, "You're using the spill as a crutch." She lived in a home that made her sick among townsfolk who undermined her. All through the winter, I struggled through all the horrible combinations of trying this or that, of coming and going, Hodges said, of her time split between Alberton and Missoula. A final symptom that pushed me over the edge, I got those tumors on my face, really fast growing. There was some kind of a precancerous sarcoma or something. They were right around my eyebrows. I was just falling to pieces. I had them taken off. I thought, I'm getting facial tumors. I can't walk. I just gave it up. Being home in the town she had chosen, in the house she had felt lucky to buy, where she had lived a life she had loved, was killing her. It was terrible to be in that place, to be so sick that you can't leave and know that you want to leave. And Deb Griffin was about in the same shape I was that winter. We were all just totally losing it. I was so weak. Deb Griffin was only a few blocks away, and I couldn't even get to her house. I didn't have the strength. Lucinda Hodges' meltdown came just before the first anniversary of the spill, as the spring thaw released malevolent odors, like her personal kraken. She clearly remembered fleeing the gas on April 11, 1996, but of that terrible night on the cusp of spring 1997, Hodges wouldn't recall exactly how she escaped Alberton forever. I remember waking up and I couldn't speak, and I felt very strange, and I tried to wake Mark up to tell him that I couldn't speak, but it was like I didn't have control of my muscles, and I fell out of bed. And this is when I'm wrapping my legs in joints every day. And I tried to get down the hall to get to the bathroom, and I couldn't stand up. And I honestly can't even remember what happened that night, or how I got out of the house. If I ever woke Mark up, what happened? I think I ended up in the backyard, but I'm not really sure, because I would do better outside. She could endure no more. Her consciousness in a fog, something primal took over. Living at home had become immediately dangerous to life and health, as if a second coming of the noxious cloud descended upon Alberton. Hodges fled in her car again in the middle of the night, her Alberton dream a nightmare. She never went back to live. I just realized that I was going to die if I stayed in that house. I just couldn't go back. I couldn't face it. I couldn't be sick like that. Those were my black days, And I look back and I don't know how I existed, how I got money, how I managed to write letters or do any of the stuff for ACCEH because I was totally falling apart. When Hodges pulled her kids out of school, she told the principal, "I'm too sick, I can't do it. The kids, I'm not going to leave them behind." And the school just kind of passed them on to the next grade. But with her permanent exodus, she said, Mark was upset. He took it personally. He thought that I was leaving him, and I wasn't, but I was losing it. After her final evacuation from Alberton, she said, "I got better, slowly, not completely, but we all improved upon leaving the house. Slowly after I left, my breathing came up. I went off the albuterol, off the prednisone. It took me a year, though, after I left, to where I could walk without my braces. The house remained. Even in 2000, Hanson still sometimes spent the night in Alberton instead of the Missoula trailer. I don't think he'll ever leave that place till it's settled," Hodges said that year. "He's watching the investment, I guess. He's got to have something to do. He can't stand it here. What's he going to do? He's got to have his garage and his things. He doesn't know how to cope without that. I don't think men are as strong as women. He can't stand to be here for very long because he's got nothing to do but be in here and watch TV. Right or wrong, he can do things in Alberton. He can split wood, fix the truck. He can't do any of that in a trailer park. And he gets the numb lips and the lack of sensation, but he lives with it. It doesn't seem to interfere with his ability to function." Years after she fled, Hodges reminisced. "I loved my house. I loved my garden. I loved going to the river. The old Merc, Railroad Street, friends like Griffin." She had chosen to live in a railroad town, and the railroad derailed her life. When the spring thaw warmed the earth and the smell was awoken, Hodges was not alone in seeking exodus from Alberton. Next time on Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. On the first anniversary of the spill, the spring thaw awakens toxic odors, and many Alberton area residents experience a resurgence in their illness. Before some families give up and leave their homes, they attempt a protest against Montana Rail Link in hopes of gaining publicity and awareness. Until then, this is Ron Scholl. Thanks for listening. This podcast is adapted from the book Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. Visit Amazon.com to see the 2-book series. To access support material in the book, such as maps, photos, illustrations, and video links, visit my Facebook page Gas, the true story, or watch my Gas playlist on my YouTube channel at RL Scholl.